Have you ever noticed how much value we place on how people look? I mean, think about it. We idolize our favorite celebrity. We do everything we can to look like them. We dress like them, do our hair like them, we buy their products. We do everything possible to look like the celebrities we idolize. We live in a culture that is absolutely obsessed with physical appearances. Think about the number of celebrities and social media influencers where their entire brand is centered around their body and their physical attractiveness. Or think about your favorite actor. Now, maybe you appreciate their acting ability or their humor or some other aspect of their career, but chances are some of your favorite actors are your favorite simply because of how they look. Think about the number of girls who only watch Marvel movies so they can see a shirtless Thor scene. Or think about the number of guys who will see a rom-com with their favorite actress, even though they don't even like rom-coms. We live in a culture absolutely obsessed with physical appearances. But here's what's always been interesting to me. We idolize people who look good on the outside, even when we know full well that they're a terrible person and their life is falling apart on the inside. Now, I know this is a generalization, but think about your favorite actor or actress. Odds are they're on their second or third or fourth marriage. Think about your favorite celebrity or influencer. Odds are you could make a list of the 10 or 15 people they've dated or had a sexual relationship with in the last 2 years. It's fascinating to me that we idolize people who clearly have a disconnect between their external appearance and their internal life. But this disconnect doesn't just exist with celebrities, influencers, or actors. Think about politicians and pastors. With politicians, we say things like, I love their policies and political opinions. It doesn't matter if they're a genuinely terrible person as long as they get the job done. Think about how many pastors or faith leaders have built themselves a huge following of people only to find out they were embezzling money or cheating on their spouse or doing some other morally terrible thing. Everywhere we look, we see a deep disconnect between external appearances and internal realities. But here's what's crazy to me. We don't care. We're perfectly content to idolize people who we know are awful as long as they're sexy, cool, and good looking. But here's what's even crazier to me. We do the same thing in our own lives. We curate an image of ourselves on social media and in real life to make sure we appear exactly how we want to appear, even though on the inside we feel like we're completely falling apart. If you opened up Instagram or TikTok right now and started scrolling, you would think that every person in the world is 17 to 24 years old, really good looking, very successful, and happy every single moment of every day. Why then do we have the highest rates of depression, drug abuse, anxiety, and suicide in all of human history? Why is there such a deep disconnect between how things appear on the outside and how they really are on the inside? The reality is this disconnect between our appearances and our internal lives has always existed. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul wrote a letter to a church in the ancient city of Corinth. And he wrote them a letter because they were obsessed with appearances. You see, in the first few decades after Jesus rose from the grave, there were a lot of preachers and teachers traveling around and talking about Jesus. But not all of these preachers and teachers were telling the truth. Some of them had actually known Jesus and been taught by him, but others were out traveling the world, trying to make themselves famous by using the name of Jesus. The teachers who were trying to make a name for themselves were traveling around, living in luxury and style. They had the latest clothes. They were eloquent and articulate speakers. On the outside, they looked like exactly who Jesus would use to share his gospel, but on the inside, they didn't even know God. On the flip side, the preachers and teachers who actually knew Jesus were poor, uneducated, and not that great at public speaking. The church in Corinth had been influenced by some of these fake teachers, but they'd also been influenced by some of the real teachers as well. So the Apostle Paul, one of the real teachers, wrote a series of letters to this church, encouraging them and challenging them to believe in the true gospel of Jesus. In these letters, Paul explains that what actually matters is what's on the inside of a person, their heart, their character, whether they've been transformed by Jesus. You see, Paul explains that the gospel of Jesus isn't about having it all together on the outside, but wasting away in anxiety and depression on the inside. No. Paul tells the church in Corinth, and he's telling us today, that the gospel of Jesus is about having our heart and soul transformed by the saving grace of Jesus. In 2 Corinthians 4:7, Paul writes, "We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us." Paul compares himself to a jar of clay. He's telling the Corinthians, yeah, I'm not fancy. I'm not rich or handsome or famous or a really great public speaker, but none of that matters because the power of Jesus has transformed my life and it can transform yours too. When we look at the world, we see a culture that is obsessed with appearances. We live in a culture where it's more important to look good than actually be good. But Paul turns all of that upside down. He's telling us that what's most important is on the inside. That when your heart has been transformed by the message and power of Jesus, you don't have to fake it on the outside anymore. And I think some of us need to hear that good news, that you don't have to fake it. You don't have to pretend like everything's okay when it's really not. You don't have to keep comparing yourself to everyone else's highlight reel because Jesus wants to transform your heart. He's not going to make you cooler or better looking or more popular so that you seem important on the outside. Instead, he wants to transform who you are on the inside. But then in verse 10 of 2 Corinthians 4, the Apostle Paul says something really interesting. In verse 10, he says, "We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may also be revealed in our mortal body." What an interesting passage. Paul's telling us that the transformation of our hearts, the transformation of our lives, the transformation of who we are comes through the death of Jesus. Not only that, Paul tells us that we are being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may also be revealed in us. The world's telling us that no matter how things are going on the inside, you have to make it look like it's perfect on the outside. But Jesus tells us the opposite. He tells us that on the outside, we're going to go through hard things. We're going to have challenges. We're going to be given over to death. But inwardly, we're going to experience a goodness greater than anything we could have ever imagined. Which leads us to our key verse for this series, 2 Corinthians 4:16. It says, "Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, inwardly we're being renewed day by day." Inwardly, we're being renewed day by day. No matter what it looks like on the outside, when we've placed our trust in Jesus, then on the inside, we're being renewed day by day. Now, that word renewed in the Greek language is kainos. Kainos is the name of this series we're doing together because we want to focus on being renewed. You see, the word kainos doesn't mean new like brand new. It means new like when you take something old and turn it into something new and amazing, because Jesus wants to take the old you. He wants to take your brokenness. He wants to take your anxiety and depression and fear and transform it. He wants to create something new and beautiful out of it. But here's the reality. Being transformed, being renewed, isn't some mystical, magical experience. It comes through the death of Jesus. It's through the suffering and pain of the cross that we can be transformed. We carry the death of Jesus in our bodies as we daily die to our old self so that the new life of Jesus can be in us. So what does all this mean? We've talked about jars of clay and death and transformation and renewal, but what does all this mean? Why should you care about any of this? If you're tired of living in a world where there's a disconnect between your outer life and your inner life, if you're tired of pretending like everything is perfect, if you're tired of being obsessed with appearances, if you're tired of feeling empty and broken on the inside, but pretending like you've got it all together on the outside, then it's time to be renewed. It's time to realize that through the death and suffering of Jesus, you can have a new life. Your brokenness can be transformed. Next week in our next video, we're going to see how God transforms our hearts so that we can go out and transform the world. Because he doesn't want to just renew individuals, he wants to renew all of creation. Until then, if you're watching this in person, I'm going to turn it back over to Spencer and Dustin and Tigard. I hope you have an honest and vulnerable small group discussion, and I'll see you guys next week.